Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 57 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not too much. How are you?
I'm good, man. Any significance for the Oakland A's hat today?
Nope.
Nope. Just feeling it.
Just feeling it. Yeah, top of the pile.
Feeling the beautiful stadium, right?
Definitely not that.
So today we're going to cover outfield 2, which is for us outfielders number 17 through 32. We do 16 players per position because our home league is a 16-team league. You can parcel that out as you may, but for us, this is outfield 2. Do you have any coffee stories for us today?
I don't. One of the interesting things about my job currently is I work at a roasting plant for Starbucks, and last night we had a problem with one of the bags and there was cuts in it, and so we were going through this pallet pulling out all the good bags, and so I brought home a bag that we were going to throw out that was roasted 2 days ago.
Nice.
And it's not gassy because it's flushed with nitrogen during
Right.
the grinding process, and so it's kind of fun to have a like freshly roasted coffee from a company the size of Starbucks. It's just kind of funny to me.
Right.
It's like, because ordinarily it's not gonna hit shelves for like 2.5, 3 months by the time
Yeah.
it gets to where it's going.
That's crazy.
But I'm having like 2 days later, so it's
That's
just kind
what
of interesting.
um they say that with wine, as an example, anything that's different or anything that stretches your palate one way or another is important, right, to the palate, the education of your palate, or for your understanding of wine. And I think the same applies to things like coffee, right? Like having something that is 2 days off a roast it might not be optimal for some, but
Yeah.
it's an educational opportunity. I think that was always fun for me. Like in my coffee world, it was always somewhere between like 7 and 12 days was optimal, or 6 and 12. And it was really interesting to try, especially coffees that age quickly, to try something at 6 days versus 12. They tasted like completely different beans and completely different from different continents. That's fun. I am currently drinking so I should rewind. In my 20s, I drank a ton of mate tea, Argentine tea. Well, I guess it's technically not tea, but it functions as tea, and highly caffeinated. Was reading tons of books on Che Guevara as a 20, in my 20s. It's interesting to me. He drank mate. I started drinking it. I love the taste, but I kind of forgotten about it, right? Um, but it's super cheap and it's super caffeinated, and I personally love the flavor. I know lots of folks don't. So I've started having it as my late morning, early afternoon caffeine. So here's to mate, and this isn't a gourd, it's my UPS mug, but I do have the cool straw that where you put the leaves in the mug and you use the straw to drink the tea, and it holds the leaves in the cup using the filter. So kind of fun. Not quite coffee, but has been taking the place of my second cup of coffee over the last, I'd say.
Where can I find that if I want to try it? Is it hard to find?
No, just go on even Amazon and type in yerba mate as 2 words. They're smoked and non-smoked. Non-smoked, I think, is probably the easiest place to start. The smoked is a little bit more, I don't know, obtrusive almost, or acute, I would say.
Yeah.
But like you can literally get a kilo, 2.2 pounds for like $12, and you don't use more than a tablespoon or 2 per mug. So it's very cheap, but it's my go-to tea. I love it.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna be getting groceries this weekend, so you'll probably be getting a text from me with a picture saying, "Is this the
Sweet.
right thing? Am I buying the right thing?"
Awesome. That's good stuff. All right, man. Outfield 2, let's get started. I found it really interesting. I think we talked offline before we got started here that it's a pool that is not a particularly fun one to swim in, right? If you don't get one of the top 16 or so outfielders to get started, you're kind of screwed, right? You could probably piece together a pretty good outfield with 3 from this group, but it's not a comfortable place to be. You're hoping on a couple of them in all likelihood, that they're going to perform at their, above where they have for their career. It's also, like most positions, it's a bit of a Cheesecake Factory menu towards the bottom for me, where you pick the stat that you want to supplement your other players, and knowing that that player may give you, or there may be a void in 1 or 2 categories for that particular player. So anyways, I think it's a really interesting, outfield 2 is a very interesting group of players. Not a perfect group of players, but still a lot of fun. Who is your outfield, the number 1 outfielder in your outfield 2 rankings?
Yeah, so a quick PSA following up on our last Alpha 1 pod that affected my rankings. I was doing some more research on Harper, and I misunderstood his timeline. I had him as my outfield 12. My understanding was that he would not play the outfield until the All-Star break, but and reading more, it sounds like he's not going to play at all until the All-Star break.
Correct.
So I just wanted to, full disclosure, mention that because I felt like I overranked him, just again based on my misunderstanding of his timeline. But now the pitchers and catchers are in camp, there was some more details, and I was reading that. I was like, wow, okay, I misunderstood that. So so I moved him out of my top 16. So that moved up Rosarina, Harris, and then I moved up Springer and Buxton, 2 players that we talked about last time, because you had him in your top 16. So I just wanted to mention that. So my first outfielder 17, number 1 for today's discussion, was Tyler O'Neill of the Cardinals.
Cool. I have Tyler O'Neill at the very bottom of my outfield 2. So he's my number 16 outfield 2. Let's talk about him.
Okay. Polarity.
Right? As always, there's already a podcast called The Mismatch, so we can't take that one, but we're pretty damn close. All right, Tyler O'Neill, what is it that puts him at the top of your outfield 2?
Yeah, so Tyler O'Neill, 27-year-old left fielder for the Cardinals. I mean, he had a really good season 2 years ago. He was really banged up last year. I just think he checked so many boxes in terms of power, speed, age, team context. The concerning thing would be strikeout rate, and then I think also health. But I think, we've already put guys like Buxton ahead of him who have the same sort of health question marks, right? And so we can put that caveat on Eloy Jimenez, or Starling Marte, or Christian Yelich. Some of the other guys we're probably going to talk about, guys who have battled back or issues. So I think that has to be in the mix when you talk about Tyler O'Neill. But the power, speed, 27 years old, and I just think I couldn't ignore the barrel rate and the sprint speed. He's projected to bat 6th in the Cardinals lineup. And I just think he offered a little bit of glimpse of what he's capable of 2 years ago. And I'm not quite willing to completely say he can't come close to like repeating 80% of that, given his raw tools.
I agree. I think you can't ignore the power and speed, right? Despite the warts. And I think that's going to be a theme throughout this pod is you have to ignore warts at times. The K rate has been so egregiously high at times with him that, there are players you can live with the high K rate. I think his is at a point where it could tank him, right? And it has essentially tanked him every year except for 2021, which is when he had that career year with 34 homers and 15 steals. He's still K'd at a 31.3% clip. So I think that he's proven that he can play pretty well, striking out almost a third of the time. The other concerning thing is that hasn't been mentioned yet is that his success in 21 was with a 366 BABIP. And
I knew that was coming. I was really looking at his BABIP. Okay, Tino's going to mention his BABIP.
That's funny. Well, it's if you look at that compared to last year, it's almost was it 89.8 difference between last year
Mhm. Yeah.
and so my first reaction when I see BABIP that's kind of out of norm or on the margins is, do they hit an extreme number of ground balls versus fly balls, or fly balls versus ground balls? And his mix is actually pretty good. He's right. So last
Mhm.
year it was 42% ground ball and 37.8% fly ball.
Right.
So my guess is he lands somewhere in the middle of those 2 years from a BABIP perspective, which would make
Right.
him, about a 255 hitter. So what I have for him is, in my notes, is 2020 question mark, right? I think that a 2020 season from almost said Paul, from Tyler O'Neill is likely, provided health. I think there's upside with him, which is obviously something that we look for. Uh Team context is very good. I also wonder, if he struggles out of the gate, how much patience will they have with him? Because there are a lot of options to replace him, right? If
Right.
Jordan Walker isn't up, he's going to be in double or triple A ready to go.
Right.
Lars Nootbaar is going to play every day. You have, Brendan Donovan can play outfield when need be. You have Dylan Carlson in the outfield. Juan Yepez can play outfield if necessary. And then they also have Alec Burleson, who I think is a very good hitter, who is in kind of chomping at the bit to play, right? And he's going to be a corner as well. So I just think that I exercise a bit of caution. They have Oscar Mercado in the minors, Moises Gomez in the minors, who's hit really well. There's a lot of players that could replace him if he scuffles out of the gate, and
Right.
St. Louis wants to compete. So I agree. I think he's proven that he can be a really big power speed guy. There are too many ifs for me to rank him at the top of this list. I think that if his BABIP is for real, if he doesn't strike out too much, right?
Thing
If,
that I find
if
encouraging about
healthy.
his play profile is it's the swing and miss is not driven by an inability to recognize balls and strikes. He doesn't chase a ton, it's that he misses in the zone, right?
Right.
So that's one of the things that gives me a little bit of more confidence is it's not chase. He's 27, so he does have an idea of the strike zone, and I like that. As you mentioned as well, he has that mix that we look for, right? He has that launch angle and the ground ball rate that should steady his batting average if as you said, his BABIP is in the normal range. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's definitely a swing and miss without a doubt.
So I just brought up zone contact on Savant, and I think for me concerning is his zone contact last year is 76.6%, which is, as we've stated previously, below 80% is, you have to ask questions, but is not a death sentence, right? There are plenty of sluggers that are in that range, but that was the highest of his career. So he went from 71.1 in 19 to 72 to 73.9. And for me, that's low enough that it causes, quite a bit of concern for me. So he's uber athletic, right? If he hits the ball, he's going to hit it a mile. If he gets on base, he's going to steal bases. I don't, he's not that far away. My ranking is not too far away from yours.
Yeah.
But he's not, for me, I'll let someone else take that chance. There are too many concerns for me. But
Yeah.
does he have 30-30 or 35-35 upside? He absolutely does. And that's hard to ignore.
Yeah, and that's the challenging part about this tier you outlined is that I'm staring at Eloy Jimenez, who's a couple down on my list, and he is basically within a few percentage points of within O'Neill on zone contact and whiff rate, but he chases 30% more of the time, and he doesn't run, and I only have him 2 spots lower. But a similar
yeah,
type.
we'll get to Jimenez. I
You know?
disagree. I think he's a much better player and a much better bet than Tyler O'Neill is, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So I have three. I'll just say my top three outfielders. I see there are a lot of similarities, and so I'm going to name all three.
Okay.
I have Luis Robert at 1. It's probably as low as you'll see him on rankings. That's my outfield 17. We can talk about why in a minute. Teoscar Hernandez. So Robert is in his own tier. And then my next tier is 4 outfielders, but the top 2 in that tier are Teoscar Hernandez and Eloy Jimenez. They all have there are a lot of similarities in their profiles, right? They all 3 swing a ton. All 3 are incredibly strong. They hit the ball hard. Robert is the only one who will steal bases. So let's start with Robert. Did you have him in outfield 1? I don't remember.
I did not. And I'm actually 1 spot off from you. I have him at 18.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we're close on him.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I don't know what to make of him.
I don't either.
I still don't know what to make of him. I think it's a really unique profile. He literally swings at everything and makes, there's a ton of swing and miss, right? His swinging strike rate last year was 15.2%. And his chase rate was in the 1st percentile. So he chases everything, but he eventually makes contact, right? So he swings so much that he doesn't strike out a ton because he's just swinging, and then he hits the ball. I would love to see a little bit more selectivity from him. He swung at the first pitch 49% of the time, which is the least of the last couple of years for him, the lowest. League average is 29.5%. So he's swinging at the first pitch, what is that, 19.5% more often than your average hitter. But he hits the ball incredibly hard, right? 117 max EV over the last 2 years, which is in the 99th percentile. His launch has gone down to 10 degrees last year from 16.7 2 years ago. Not a patient hitter. It's interesting because similar in some ways to Tyler O'Neill, which is even if he scuffles, he's still going to give you double-digit homers and steals, right? The question with Robert is also health. He's never had more than he's never played a full season. His biggest season in the minors was in 2019. He had 551 plate appearances. All that is to say, he's still a very, very talented player with elite upside. I think he was being drafted in the low end of the 1st round last season, and the expectation was that you had a 25 homer, 25 stolen base hitter that could do more potentially and hit 300. Because he hits the ball on the ground, it's 45% ground ball rate last year, and he hits the ball hard. There's a high likelihood that he hits for a pretty high average, but doesn't realize those 30 home runs. I rank him here just because I think there's too much talent in his bat to, for him to not pop a really big season at some point. I just don't know if I want to be the one that's hoping for Luis Robert to be healthy and to pop that big season. But he legitimately has MVP talent in his bat.
Do you have an explanation or insight as to what happened to his sprint speed? I know he has a 70 on his hit, coming out, he had a 70 on his speed and his ability to run. His sprint speed was very mediocre last year. And I'm looking at his injury. I thought it must be injury, but the injury was a wrist.
He's gotten big. He's just bigger. He reminds me a bit of Yasiel Puig. Okay. That he's this like uber strong, athletic, like cyborg type of athlete. But those athletes, I from what I've seen, is they'll go from being 5-tool type, not slight, but just fit, to continuing to be fit, but adding more and more muscle, which slows them down. And that's what I see with Robert. He still plays center field. I don't know if that's the best fit. If it was me, I'd move him to right, but they don't really have a center fielder to take over. I don't think Benintendi is a good defensive center fielder. He's athletic enough to play center field in Chicago, but is not, as you pointed out, he's not nearly as fast as he was coming up, but still uber athletic. I think from a fantasy standpoint, I think he'll go a lot higher in a redraft than I would be willing to pay for him, given the risk, both in his plate approach and in his health. But ranking him any lower than the top, half or top third of outfield 2, I think is not paying attention to the talent that he has. But I'll let someone else take him.
For what it's worth, the projection systems don't know what to make of him either. He has one of the highest deviations from of all the players. From system to system, so they don't know what to make of him either. So
he's fascinating, man, and I like I said, if I'll let someone else use their lottery ticket on him, there are other guys that I would prefer. My number two, beginning of my next tier at outfield two, is Teoscar Hernandez of the Seattle Mariners. Where did you have Hernandez?
24.
Okay. So that would be pretty much in the middle of this tier, correct? Or in the middle of outfield two, correct?
Yeah.
So he's super interesting. In 21, he had 32 homers, 92 runs, 116 RBIs, and 12 steals, which is a phenomenal year, right? That puts him square in the middle of outfield one if he was to replicate that. Last year, 25 home runs, 71 runs, 77 RBIs, and 6 stolen bases. So he reduced his production quite a bit. What I found really interesting with him is he didn't do a ton different in 22 versus 21. His BABIP went down 17 points. His launch angle was slightly higher in 21. So he hit more fly balls in 21, more ground balls in 22. But randomness also played a role for him, right? There were reduction in his counting stats because the Toronto offense scored 71 more runs in 21 than they did in 22. But he hit in the same spot in the lineup. And he's always, what I love about him is he hits the ball so hard. 96th percentile average EV, 94th percentile max EV, 98th percentile hard hit, 94th percentile barrel, and he's also 84th percentile speed. He doesn't show up in his stolen bases, his speed, but he's just an incredibly explosive athlete. The one thing that he did struggle with in 22 is he struggled with the slider. He did not struggle with the slider in 21. His run value against the slider in 21 was a +13, which was higher than four-seam fastball. In 22, his four-seam fastball run value was +20. Slider was -10. So he essentially forgot how to hit the slider in 22. He is another guy whose zone contact is historically been under 80% and pretty low. But he's proven that he can still produce even though his zone contact is low. I think he's a lock for 25 plus home runs and 85 to 90 runs and RBIs. I think the Seattle lineup is on the ascent. He also, I've heard people knock him because of his change of park from Toronto to Seattle. If you look at his batted ball metrics, as I stated, I don't think he cares if it's T-Mobile, Rogers Center, or Yellowstone Park, right? I really don't think Teoscar Hernandez cares. So he hits the ball that hard. I think we see another couple years of 25 to 30 home runs, 85 to 100 runs and RBIs. He seems to be a very consistent player over the last 3 years. He's not going to walk a ton, but he's a player that I love. And I think that he's shown from a health perspective that you can kind of count on him producing at this level. I would love him as my outfield 3. He's ranked second in my outfield 2 ranks. I would be, if he's my outfield 2 or my outfield 1, I'm definitely having to supplement him with some steals and potentially some average as well. What do you have to add on Teoscar?
So for me, yeah, I see him as has a lot of the same zone contact issues of the other power guys we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of the pack in chase rate, but does have the premium, barrel rate and hard hit rates. So yeah, I think if you're looking to me, he's one of the more secure power RBI, options in this range.
Mm-hmm.
As he gets over that 30 mark, and I think I didn't look at the run value on his slider. I think that's a great call out on your part. And that's one of the things that guys that do chases, it's one of the first things that show up as they age is the ability to or the failure or inability to reach pitches out of the zone and maybe foul them off, whereas before they could when they were younger. So I think, his batting average will continue to creep down a little bit, but I think what he can do and what he with the attributes he has, which is what I try to do or challenge myself to do is like what can they do instead of focusing on their holes. Like to me, he's again one of the more stable power RBI options in this pool, and that's the way I would value him.
Mm-hmm. I would add that, with diet, technology, kind of study, players age differently now.
Sure.
Right. I think the peak was 26, 27, and I think the peak is probably still there, but the backside of players' careers is a much less steep descent, right? We would see players fall off at 30, 31 and just go away. And I think that players now, we see a lot of players being able to continue playing at a very high level, 32, 33, 34 years old. So I'm going to wait to see him decline as opposed to predict the decline with him.
For sure.
I also think that the Mariners I trust the Mariners organization to, if there's something that can be fixed with his pitch recognition or taught, that they'll be able to do it. He did spray the ball a lot more last year. And I wonder if there was an approach change as well, that maybe he was looking to spray the ball a little more, or he was pitched a lot more on the outside corner, and that they were afraid to come in with fastballs because of his previous year. And he wasn't able to adjust to it last year. I wonder if he does make an adjustment to that approach this year and he's able to hit sliders better. Despite that, as I said, I think that 85 to 90 runs and RBIs and 25 to 30 home runs is a realistic expectation for Teoscar next year. I'm super excited to watch him as a Mariners fan too. Fun player. At 3, I have Eloy Jimenez. Who is your number 3?
Same.
Sweet.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, Eloy Jimenez, 26 years old, Chicago White Sox, kind of toggling between left and right field. I believe he's going to play DH for the most part next year, with a little bit of corner outfield sprinkled in. What are your
Anybody who rosters him is hoping the same.
right? What are your your impressions of Eloy Jimenez? What do you expect from him next year?
Well, we can call this the Tino factor. I mean, this is me pushing up a young guy. 26. I think who has a lot of the same power tools as some of the guys I have below, but because he's 26 and he has the pedigree, I think he can get away with a little bit more of the chase. And I think the barrel and hard hit rates that we've seen when has been able to play. And as I joked about him, anyone who rosters him hoping he DHs, but I think his position is the batter's box. Right. And I think if you got a full healthy season out of him, and with the barrel rates that we've seen, he could be a really tremendous source of power. I mean, you're not going to get any speed. But I just think I have him here based on the pedigree and the power.
He has, of this group, I think he has by far the highest power upside. I had last year, 54.9% hard hit and a 14.7% barrel rate is pretty insane, right? One thing I like about him, that, the criticism is that he hits the ball on the ground too much.
Yeah.
Right? But I actually so it's 50.4% ground ball rate last year. It's always been between 48 and 52 for him, which is obviously too much for a big power player like Jimenez. He doesn't realize his power as much in game as he would if he elevated the ball more. However, he's a high average hitter.
Right.
And I think that one of the values of Eloy Jimenez is he's probably, his floor for his batting average, if he's healthy, is probably 275 to 280. And he could hit 300 because he hits the ball as hard as he does and he hits it on the ground. I kind of like that, especially if I'm trying to fill in that category because I have other players who might be more power players, right, with a lesser average. I think he can give you both. I still believe in him as a hitter. I really do. I think that the only concern with him is health. He also hits the ball more to center field than he does pull, which may actually bode well for him with the new shift rules. I think players that hit the ball up the middle are going to see a higher average than they did last year because of the shift rule. He also has no platoon risk. and he's better against sinker slider than he is against four seam fastball. So just an interesting player. I see him as having a 65 hit tool. So to be that large of a human and have that kind of hit tool is I think that gives him a higher ceiling than it might some other type of players. He's my he's my number 3, but I see him as a player on the rise, especially if he can maintain his health. It would not surprise me to see us rank him in the middle to low outfield 1 next year if he's able to stay healthy. Anything to add with Jimenez for you?
I don't think so. I know that Ethan Katz, their pitching coach, has gotten a lot of credit. I would love to see a really good hitting coach or hitting program get a hold of some of these White Sox hitters and really see if they can refine some of the rough edges in their approaches. Because you just mentioned you see him as a 65 at tool, and I'm not questioning that because I'm sure you have your reasons. I look at the zone rates and the reach rates, and it's like, you know, if someone could help him get to those tools, right?
I disagree. I think he does. And I think that zone and reach rates are not the end all for me. I think that someone like Jimenez with the kind of bat to ball skill, you know, you look at obviously this is a Hall of Famer, but you look at Vladimir Guerrero Sr. And, you know, I'm sure his reach rates and zone rates are completely like tanked. But because he had the bat to ball skill and the hand-eye coordination and the hit tool, I don't know that it matters as much. And I see Jimenez in the same way, where Jimenez's kryptonite is that he doesn't elevate enough. And he may not elevate enough because of his zone and reach rates, but I think it's more of a tweak than it is a fault, right? And I think there's a lot of players, you know, I've said this before, you can't walk your way off the island, right? That's what the Latin players say. You have to be able to hit the ball to make the major leagues. And so a lot of players are taught or learn down the line a lot more plate discipline or a lot more their plate approaches refined as they get older. It takes them longer to do it. I don't know that that'll happen with Jimenez, but I don't knock it. I think, yes, I agree with you that as organizationally, the White Sox need a better hitting coach and they need a defined approach, 100%. Yoan Moncada as an example. But Jimenez, to me, I think he's doing what he can. And I like the fact that if you hit the ball that hard, I would almost prefer that you're hitting the ball as often as you can, as opposed to waiting for the perfect pitch. He had a 500 OPS 3 of his 4 major league seasons, right? But it's just, what's that?
You mean 800?
Or excuse me, yes, 500 slug, 800 OPS.
500 slug, okay. Okay, perfect.
But I think that there is room for different types of approaches, and Teoscar and Robert, I grouped the 3 of them because I think that they are low walk rate. You know, they chase a ton, but they hit the ball so hard when they hit it, and they hit it often enough that should be their approach, right? Unless I don't want to take that aggressiveness away from them.
Sure.
Jimenez is only lower because of his health.
Statcast is full of this. I would try to pull up Senior's contact rates, and we didn't track such things back then. I can't see what
right? That's funny. I wonder if Fangraphs has any of that.
That's what I'm on. I don't see it.
That's funny. All right, let's take a quick break and come right back with the numbers 4, 5, and 6. Number 4. Who's your number 4 outfield 2?
Corbin Carroll.
Cool. We covered Corbin Carroll in outfield 1 when I had him ranked. Is there anything you want to add? Difference of opinion at all, or just kind of where you put a younger player or a player without experience?
Yeah, so I have a group here, sort of how you clustered those. Low walk, high power. I have Carroll, Mullins, and Marte here clustered together as speed options, and with, I think, Carroll, I think the power is to be determined. I know he showed it in the minors. Mullins, I'm more skeptical about the bat, and then Marte is 34, and I think his power is on the decline. So But all three are stolen base assets, and I just liked Carroll the most of that group because I think he has more ceiling, obviously more potential than those other two.
Mhm.
But all three of them, I have the speed wise significant contributors in speed. But I think yeah.
So just to recap, I had Carroll, I believe at 13, I want to say. And then I had Mullins, I believe, at 16. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it looks like something in that range. I agree with that assessment. I think that it's just a filter difference between you and I. As we've talked about, I like Mullins a lot. I think Mullins has more power than obviously than Marte. Marte I have down at 14 on this outfield 2 list, mostly because he is what he is, and he doesn't provide really RBIs to speak of, and at this point in time, not as many runs or steals as he used to. That's a declining skill set for me. Whereas I think Mullins is still in his prime and Carroll's on the ascent, which is why I would rank them higher. I also think they both have a lot more power than Marte does. Anything to add on those three for you?
No.
So again, I had Luis Robert at 1, kind of in his own tier. Teoscar Hernandez, Eloy Jimenez 2 and 3, and then 4 and 5 in this tier for me, and it's the end of my tier, are Seiya Suzuki and Brian Reynolds. These are two players you had in outfield 1. I'll start with Suzuki. Very good hitter, does nothing elite. I think there are some concerns that I have. I think he would have had a much better, what I have in my notes is he would have had a much better year if they didn't change the baseball in 22. He is an opposite field hitter that only pulled the ball 28.3% of the time last season. And I think that we all know that opposite field power basically went away in 2022 because of the composition of the baseball. And so I think he was hurt a ton by that because he hits the ball hard. He just hits it to the opposite field. 63rd percentile average EV, 75th percentile max EV, 11.2 degree launch angle. Well, exactly 40-40 mix. I was pretty surprised to see that his ground ball, fly ball with literally the same number of events for each. 8% strikeout rate, or swinging strike rate, excuse me. So makes contact when he swings. The craziest stat that I found with Suzuki was that he swings at the first pitch 12.3% of the time. So just slightly over 1 out of every 10 times he swings at the first pitch. League average is 29.5%. So, and he hits most every pitch very similarly. So he's best against the fastball, but his run value ranges went from -2 to 3, which I found interesting as well. The one big concern for me that could potentially hurt him is that he had pretty discernible splits against lefties and righties. Last year, his OPS against right-handers was 105 points lower than against left-handers. So I certainly don't think he's a platoon player. I wouldn't rank him here if I did, but it's something to watch. Maybe you sit Suzuki against elite right-handed pitching at times, or at least keep an eye on it. He's a player who I don't think has a tremendous ceiling, but I also think his floor is pretty high. He's safe. Provided health and a good season for him, it's 290, maybe 850 OPS. That's pushing it. 25 home runs and 10 to 15 steals. I think that's a great year. My assumption is this year or next year are going to be his peak years in MLB. A good player to have. I don't want him as my outfield 1, but I think a very good support player in an outfield, fantasy outfield, and a player worth having on your team. Anything I didn't cover from your observations of Suzuki in last episode?
No.
Cool. So Brian Reynolds gets to it from a different path, but I think I see him in a similar light to Suzuki. High floor, low ceiling, safe player for me. Outfield 2, a good supportive outfield 2, not an outfield 1 in my mind. Last year, 262, 345, 806 in 614 plate appearances. His one interesting fact with Brian Reynolds is that most players, obviously, their BABIP the ups and downs of their BABIP will dictate their average over the next season. In his career year in 19, his BABIP was 387, which is, I think, unsustainable. And that's when he hit 314. In 21, it was 345 and he hit 302. Last year, it was 306 and he hit 262. In my mind, a 306 BABIP for a player like Brian Reynolds is pretty, it's kind of where you would expect it to be. He's slight ground ball, lean over fly ball, and you would expect that BABIP to be slightly higher. But in my mind, he's probably a 265 to 275 hitter is where he settles out, which is very good. I don't see the elite traits in Brian Reynolds. He's a line drive hitter. He's a spray hitter. I see between 260 and 280 and mid-20s home runs and 5 to 10 steals for the next couple of years. And his runs and RBIs being determined more by the team context than anything else, which is good, but not an outfield one for me. Anything to add with Reynolds for you? Do you see, I guess a better question is, I think you do see a higher ceiling. I'd like to know what it is that I'm missing, maybe that gives you the hope for a higher ceiling with Brian Reynolds.
I think he's his plate skills and his consistent track record of getting on base and with a manageable strikeout rate and hitting for power. And I think he's a very good runner. And I think that because he hasn't posted a lot of steals to date, so people might sleep on, his potential there. So, I know the environment's changing, but we also know the steals are as much will and desire as they are, skill in terms of speed. But I just think, I just think something was going on last year. He had a really poor defensive year after being a plus defender the prior year, had a really poor first half. And I think it's coloring a little bit of how he's being evaluated. I just see a really consistent player. I'd really, the launch angle, the ability to barrel the ball. There's nothing that he does exceptionally well for sure. And you're not going to get an argument from me on that. I just think his consistency and he does everything to me very well, without anything that stands out. And I really value that, I think, a little bit more.
Right. And, I think we say it twice an episode, but I think that's the discernible difference is just, how does one choose to build their team, right? If you had Suzuki and Reynolds together and maybe even another outfielder from this tier, my tier, outfield 2, I think you have a very, very competitive outfield, right? It's not going to put you over the top necessarily, but it's a competitive outfield. And I think both players are certainly positive, add value to your team. I think for me, when I look at Reynolds and Suzuki for that matter, I don't expect either of them to hit 30 home runs, and I don't expect either of them to steal more than 15 bases. So then I'm more dependent upon team context to determine whether those players actually are, give you like plus value or just give you plus value. The other, I like Reynolds a lot. I roster him in one of my dynasty teams and plan to keep him. I think that he adds tons of value. The one thing that was concerning that I found with him is that he, according to Savant, that his expected home run range last year was between 17 and 27, and he hit 27. And I was surprised to see that because I don't think of Pittsburgh as a power park. So, was his true power last year, at least, less than what it is that we saw. I think you're right, though. I think the contract negotiations or him being in trade rumors, all of that, I think, impacted him. I see his true value as somewhere between what he did in 21 and what he did in 22. His first pitch swing was 42.6% last year. which is really, really high. And I don't know that I expect that from a player like him. I think he's chasing fastballs in the same way that I saw from Mookie Betts. And so he was, I don't feel like he was a comfortable hitter last year. And I think if he
No.
does settle into some more comfort next year, we can see a much better season from him.
Yeah, it's interesting with his power. I noticed the same thing. His expected home runs were less, and yet his barrel rate was the lowest since his rookie year last year.
Mhm.
And so you would expect him to regress back to his career rate on the barrel rate, which would mean more home runs. But he's coming off a year where he kind of maybe got better luck on those than you might expect.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, he's a switch hitter. She doesn't have splits, and again, the plate skills and all that stuff. I'm guilty, honestly, of sometimes overvaluing guys for fantasy because of their real world value.
For
And I
sure.
think it's one of my biases because I like to have. I struggle rostering guys who I don't think are good baseball players,
Sure.
even though they might be really good for fantasy. And not that, anyway, it's just a block that I have.
I think I appreciate you saying that because it shows, a certain level of humility or vulnerability. I also think that it's, if you just take the name away from Brian Reynolds and look at it not from a fantasy perspective, but from a real life perspective, you have a switch hitting center fielder who's going to hit between, 260 and probably 290 on an average year with 25 home runs and 5 to 10 steals with a very good plate approach, a launch angle that is right in line with what you want, right? He's very much the kind of player you look for. And all of those things line up. Part of what I'm finding in my own scouting and doing all of these exercises, both minors and major leagues, is if a player lacks explosion, right? If a player lacks like physically, you look at him and the ball doesn't completely jump off the bat, right? Or he's not incredibly fast. If there's not that last bit of athleticism in a player, I think his ceiling oftentimes is just slightly lower, right? You look at Bryce Harper, he's incredibly strong and the ball just explodes off his bat. And he was swinging a 10,000-pound bat as an 18-year-old, right? Like that's something that it says something to me. It's why Luis Robert is such an attractive prospect. I was comparing on the last Monospod episode, Marcelo Mayer and Jackson Merrill, right? And I love both players, but Jackson Merrill is just a little faster and is a little more violent. And I think that was enough for me to rank Merrill above Marcelo Mayer. And so in this situation, it doesn't make Marcelo Mayer or say a Suzuki or Brian Reynolds less players or not as good, but it does, I think, at times cap their upside because there isn't that last bit of athleticism that you might see in an Ellie De La Cruz, right? That's the perfect example of the guy that's just uber athletic. But it's something I'm starting to find in my own scouting is looking for that explosiveness if I'm searching for elite, right? If I'm searching for high floor, knowing that I already have an elite player, Suzuki and Reynolds are great. If you have Acuna or J-Rod already, right, and you got 30 home runs and 30 steals and potentially 100 runs and RBIs, then if you have one of them plus Suzuki and Reynolds, you got a really fucking good outfield, right? But you need one of those elite guys, I think, to couple with them. All right, next tier. Next tier is where I think it gets really gnarly and interesting, and we're probably both going to be all over the board with this next tier. Who is your number? Where are we at? Number 6 for you?
Yeah, I'm still I'm counting from 16, so I'm trying to keep up with your single digits here.
Oh, got it. Sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. So we're talking about the speed guys. So yeah, my next cluster is all over the place. I had Taylor Ward and I had Teoscar, who we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I have Quan and Yelich.
Mm-hmm. So I have 6, 7, 8, 9 is Adolis Garcia, Chris Bryant, .5 Bryce Harper, and Cody Bellinger. I do have Yelich below. I do have Taylor Ward below. Let's start with your guys first.
Yeah, so I have Garcia, Bryant, and Harper on this list as well, just a couple spots down. So Teoscar we talked about.
Yep.
I had Taylor Ward one spot above Teoscar. Again, this might be some of my real world bias coming in, but just his plate skills and low strikeout rate and walk rates, and he's projected to lead off if you want to buy into such things this time of year. But his barrel rate last year was in the 88th percentile. His hard hit rate was in the 77th. He's projected for an 806 OPS. So leading off with those plate skills, I really, that was appealing to me. I ranked him as such. So yeah, he was my 23rd, which I think would make him, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's number 7.
He's I call him like a cyborg or like a robot. Like they made Taylor Ward in a lab and put him out there, and he's not quite elite, but he's very, very good. So you look at, he's like a savant page darling, right? You look at a savant page, and the only non-pink or red bubble is his K rate, which is 48th percentile. Everything else is pink, red, dark red, exactly where you want it. He's a little boring to me. You know, what I have is he's a 25 homer, 5 steal guy. Obviously his runs and RBIs will fluctuate based on where he is in that lineup. You love the fact that he's hitting in a lineup with Trout and Ohtani and potentially a healthy Anthony Rendon. He's got the 40-40 mix of 40% ground ball, 40% fly ball, meaning he's never going to tank his average, and he's going to hit for power. He's got a good launch angle. Like everything's kind of, if you built like a slightly above average corner outfielder in a lab, it would look like Taylor Ward in a lot of ways, right? I like him. I think that there's more in his profile, or there's more to him than people give credit for. And I could see him popping an even better year than last year, where he hit 23 home runs and had an OPS of 833. A little bit of a late bloomer. He's 29. He was a first round pick in 2015, so there is some pedigree. I just think he's like post hype sort of player.
I'm a little fearful of the breakout last year and buying into that, but I think again the skills I use to evaluate, and kind of buffer, what the projections are saying. I look at the skills and as a side of those and say, okay, do the skills lead me to push this projection more or pull it back? The skills I would look at support and what he's projected to do. But yeah, I'm a little fearful of the late career spike,
For sure. I think if he displayed the plate skills that he did, 10% above 10% walk rate, 21% K rate, 90 average EV, right? The correct launch angle, like we talked about, 12% barrel. Like there's a lot of really good stuff in his profile. If he was 26, he'd probably be up there with Robert Hernandez and Jimenez for me. But he's 29, and we have 1 year of history with him. The other thing with Taylor Ward is I wish he was in a line. If he played in Toronto, right? If he played for the Yankees, if he played for the Phillies, like if he was on a different team, I think you could dream on 100 runs and 100 RBIs from him in a full season. And I don't think it's that unrealistic. He just plays for the Angels. And so he had 73 runs and 65 RBIs instead.
Right.
But I like him a lot. I think he is one whose plate skills are great. I have him at 13 in outfield too. But he's a player who I might reach for if I had the opportunity. Who was next?
So it's time for me to get on my Stephen Kwan soapbox.
Uh-oh, here we go. So, okay, so let's tell the story first. Okay, so he was a player going into the 22 draft that I targeted. I was excited about him. I didn't know if he was going to be any good, but I was excited about him. All I knew was he hit the ball wherever it was pitched. Also Asian American, which is, impactful to me. I'm half Filipino. Gets drafted by someone else earlier than I thought he would. Eventually, I think he got cut.
Yes.
And I picked him up. And he ended up being a really good third outfielder for me last year. So, of course, I subsequently traded him to you in the offseason. And now you are...
Because I'm the idiot who can't look past all the problems. And I have to see
you
I
know
have
what?
to see it on the field first. And then once I saw it, I was like, shit.
Right? So my two thoughts with Quan are, one, I think he provides, as you pointed out earlier, if you're looking at positives and not negatives in a player, he's got some huge positives, right? His hit tool is phenomenal. His hand-eye coordination, phenomenal. He's going to provide some speed. His OPS is surprisingly higher than you would think from a contact hitter like he. I think in part because he stretches singles to doubles and doubles to triples.
And he walks
a ton. So here's the question. Here's why I traded him. Here's why he's probably going to be at the top of my outfield 3 and not in my outfield 2. Do you see the potential for improvement from Stephen Kwan, or has he topped out at where he's going to be?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm going to quote you. Not quote you, but you often say, like, when we look at holes in guys, like, and I know, and this is heresy because he doesn't have the tools of like a Witt or someone like that, but you look at what they posted and you think, and this was their rookie year, right? Mm-hmm. So Quan is an older rookie, but you look at what he did, and you see the skills demonstrated, and that was his first go round.
Sure.
In the majors. And so when I see his skills, and I know that he was an older rookie, but still a rookie, there is a learning curve, no matter how good the Guardians development system is and how well tooled in terms of the well honed their prospects are. That was still his rookie year. Mm-hmm. And so I still see room for growth. And I think people are sleeping on his speed. Mm-hmm. His home plate the first time is comparable to Byron Buxton and Cedric Mullins. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people really are realizing how fast he is. And I have him so in my next cluster of players, I have 15, 16, 18, 14, 17, 12, $14 projected values, right? So I have Quan at $15. And so that he's right in that group. And that's with a projection of 70 runs. I'll take the over by 20 on that.
Sure.
12 steals. I think he's
over on that as well.
I think he's going to have 35 steals, personally. So
yes, he's the type of player. So 78% or 78th percentile sprint speed, as you said, great home to first times. But he's also I think he's the type of player where he's so aggressive and pretty fast that he's a prime beneficiary of the rule changes. I'm not going to bank on 25, 30 steals, but I think that it's very realistic for him, for sure, if he's going to continue to be aggressive. So let me ask you this. You brought up Quan, you brought up Witt. Like, my argument is always, they're 22 years old. He already put up these stats, right? Like, you can expect more from him.
Right. With him, I think it's less about the tools growth. It's more just his comfort, right? It's so I don't think necessarily like he has an untapped power or untapped speed. I just think there's a comfort level. And I've listened and because I've grown in a real affection for him, I've like listened to interviews with him and read stuff about him. He's a very contemplative and introverted guy. And I think I just see I saw him getting more comfortable. That's what my eyes saw last year. And the guy took Garrett Cole in a playoff game last year.
For sure.
And he was one of their better performers in the playoffs. And he didn't look like a rookie anymore to me.
Right.
So I'm just really excited to see him with those plate skills, with those contact skills, with his speed, being fully comfortable, really having a assured like place on the team. He is their starting left fielder. He is their leadoff hitter. I just I'm just really excited to see what he does.
I am too. My only counter to what you said is that when I speak of a player going from like his first year on, it's part of it is the comfort and the knowledge, but a lot of it is also I'm assuming a certain level of physicality in their game, right? A certain level of athletic potential, like a Witt, like a J-Rod, right? Like an
Right.
Acuna, like a Tatis. There's a physicality to him that Quan doesn't have.
For
So
sure.
Quan's upside to me is not his upside to me, like from a power perspective, would be Quan hit double-digit home runs instead of single-digit home runs.
Right.
I do think the steals can grow in part because of the rule changes. In my mind, where Quan is special and where I can completely buy the argument you're making about Quan taking another step or two and therefore becoming, in my mind, an outfield two, is that he goes from hitting 298 to hitting 330, right? Quan is one of maybe 5 players in Major League Baseball that you could comfortably say he could hit 330. He has that kind of back control, right? If he hits 330 with 10 home runs and 25 steals, now all of a sudden, absolutely, he's in the outfield two conversation, probably high end outfield two for me. I just don't know if I can count on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also tend to prioritize players who are not going to kill me in any one category. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
Quan is, or was for me last year, hurt me in both home runs and in RBIs. I was surprised to see him uphold the OPS category as he did. His OPS
Yeah.
was 772. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. My only question is, is he able to realize a little more power? And can he hit 330, right? It's just you can't count on that advancement from him, whereas you can count on it from somebody who's just kind of more maturing physically. But that said, I absolutely adore Stephen Kwan. I love watching him play. I love his grittiness, his competitiveness. He's a dog, right? Like
Yeah.
he's one of those dudes that just he's mean. He's not mean, but he's got a snarl, right? Winning is everything to him. And I loved watching him play. Like I will miss having him on my team next year for sure. For sure. Who's your next guy?
So I had Yelich.
Got it. I had Yelich down at where did I have Yelich? Hold on here. 15, which would be my outfield 31.
Yeah. So this would be 26 for me. So I have him for 16 home runs, 16 steals, and 80 runs.
Mhm.
Very much, placed here as an on-based leadoff hitter with a little bit of pop, a little bit of speed.
Mhm.
Who has really good plate skills, and so that really buoys his OBP. But he doesn't, I don't really watched painfully most of his at bats last year. I don't really see an average or like a rebound on average or power, but I think his on base skills and his position as leadoff hitter will provide you a little bit of a power and speed, which getting down here, there's a lot of question marks.
Makes me sad. That's the only thing that I can really. That's my initial reaction. That just makes me sad that he's not the player that he showed in his MVP year. And I'm sure he's doing everything he can to figure out how to launch, right? I'm sure that it's probably just like a mental thing. I have Bellinger up at 9, and it's the same thing with Bellinger, but the opposite, where his launch angle is too much. But it's hard. It's hard to see players that you revere and were absolute superstars kind of crash and burn in the way that those two have. That said, Yelich still had 99. Like, okay, so I think of him as like almost a shitty player at this point in time. But yet last year it was 99 runs, 14 homers, 57 RBIs, 19 steals, and a 13% walk rate. And the athleticism is still there. Average EV was 91.5 and max EV was over 117.
Yeah.
Just hit the ground. He hit ground balls 58.6% of the time. Let me
Right.
ask you this though. So 58.6% ground ball rate, hits it super hard. Pull, center, and oppo are all in the 30s. Is there potential for, and he hit 252, is there the potential for Yelich to hit 290 or 300 next year? Because of the rule changes, because of how hard he hits the ball on the ground, because he sprays it.
Yeah, I mean, what I saw last year when he was hitting the ball better in terms of average, he was hitting it the other way, not on the ground, but more line drives. When he pulls the ball, it tends to be on the
He's
ground.
rolling over every time to second
Yes.
base.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of those are going to turn into hits. So my eye test he was not one I would gravitate towards and seeing a spike, just because when he was hitting it well, he was already getting on. I didn't see him get robbed a lot. The contact to the right side, while oftentimes was hard, it was also almost always on the ground.
Got it.
And often weak. But
I
that's anecdotal from just watching a lot of film on him.
For sure. So if you're drafting Christian Yelich, what does the rest of your outfield have to look like? And is he, so he's ranked as an outfield 2, I think, because of the lack of depth in the outfield. Where would you be comfortable with Christian Yelich in your own fantasy outfield?
As a third.
Okay. And he'd have to be
But
a
I think
third.
I would have to have a lot of RBIs banked, because I think he's pretty cemented as a really off hitter at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think the runs and the steals, a little bit of steals are, something you can get that as your from your outfield 3 and not be giving a bunch back
Right.
in other categories.
I still, the name value is gone, but I think the lottery ticket remains, right? I think it'd be a great story if Yelich or Bellinger came back and had another career year. I see it more likely in Bellinger than Yelich, but again, they both still provide value to your team. Just don't expect the MVP season from them. That's why they're valued this way.
Yeah.
Is that the end of that grouping for you?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have Adolis Garcia in outfield 2 at all?
I do. I have him at 28.
Plate approach is like the most horrendous plate approach of all time for a player with those kinds of counting stats. Adolis Garcia, 88 runs, 27 home runs, 101 RBIs, and 25 stolen bases. Sounds like a freaking superstar to me, right? When you look at those counting stats. 250, 300 on base, 756 OPS, 657 plate appearances. Last 2 seasons, 622 and 657 plate appearances, which is nuts. When he hits the ball, average EV 92.1, max EV 113, launch angle 13.1 degrees, almost a 13% barrel, over 47% hard hit, like 40-40 ground ball, fly ball mix, 42% pull. I'm like, okay, all these things are incredible, right?
Yeah.
No split right versus right-handers or left-handers. Hits 3rd or 4th in Texas lineup. That's pretty good. Swinging strike rate last year was 16.7%, and that's down from 17.2% in 21. His approach is so bad. His approach is so bad. So 40%, I think I forgot to put whiff rate, but 40% whiff rate, I believe, against breaking and off-speed stuff last year. His run value against sliders last year was -6, all the way up to +6 against sinkers. So he hit 193 with a 339 slug and a 42.3% whiff rate against the slider. And his zone contact last year was 73.4%. He chases 39, or his first pitch swing rate was 39.1% as well. Why you don't throw sliders, righty to righty, why you don't throw sliders to Adolis Garcia over and over again is beyond me. There is no way I'm throwing a fastball to Adolis Garcia, right? And there's no way I'm throwing him a strike based on this profile. Yet, major league pitchers do. I have him at 6 because it's hard to ignore 88 runs, 27 homers, 25 steals, and 101 RBIs. It's impossible to ignore that. That's the name of the game in fantasy, right? But if he got DFA'd in the middle of the season next year because he's hitting 170, I think his plate approach says that that is a decent possibility.
Right.
Super risky. I've never rostered him. The plate approach is just too scary for me. But again, you know, it's really, really hard to ignore 25-25, hitting third or fourth in a lineup. Would you touch him?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As an outfield 3?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, man. I can't do it. I can't do it. I understand that there's fantasy value. I ranked him here because there's fantasy value. I don't have the stomach for it, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't target him, but I mean, I wouldn't.
Like if
If
he
I,
dropped and dropped
yeah,
in a
yeah.
redraft, I'd be like, okay, I'll take him.
Yeah.
I still don't know if I could. I have him at 6. I don't think I'm taking him over any of the guys I have below him, personally.
Would you rather have him or Giancarlo Stanton?
Stanton.
Really? Okay.
I think Stanton, and that's just a personal thing. I don't have Stanton ranked in my outfield 2, right? So Stanton is below is outfield 33 or lower for me, whereas Adolis is outfield 22. But I think like when the rubber meets the road, I would probably take Stanton.
Yeah. I asked because he actually has worse whiff rates than Garcia does.
I'm sure he does. He also hits the ball 160 miles an hour. and plays in an offense that I think, you know, will really drive his counting stats. And there's also a different sort of track record with him. But neither player is a player that I've targeted nor rostered. I think I rostered Stanton 8 years ago, and that's about it. Let's take a quick break. We will come back with the remaining 3 for me in this tier, and then try to fly through the last 6 players or so.
Okay.
Cool. All right. My number 7 outfielder is in outfield 2 is Chris Bryant, 31 years old, second year in Colorado. Had a foot injury last year that held him to, let's see, 181 plate appearances. I kind of washed away last season as far as looking at his skills and looked at what he's done over his career to figure out what I think he's going to do next year. What I found interesting was that he had no fewer than 586 plate appearances in 15, 16, 17, 19, and in 21. So he actually has been kind of a model of health up until last year. But in my mind, I think of him as injury prone because of his injury last year, right? In those seasons, he hit no fewer than 25 home runs, had no fewer than 86 runs, had no fewer than 73 RBIs. He had 10 steals in 21. He's a 10% walk rate, low 20s K rate sort of guy, and he hits between 265 and 300. So if you took the low range of that and you said he's going to hit 265 with say 80 RBIs and 85 to 90 runs and 25 home runs, where do you put him? Right? To me, you put him right here in the middle of outfield 2. He runs super low average exit velocities, which I think is really interesting. His max EV for his career is 113. I think of him as a more explosive player than that, but he does a lot of things well. 13.5 degree launch angle was the lowest of his career, but it's right in the range that you look for. Swinging strike rate was below 10% last year. He's a fastball hitter. And he's a skilled enough hitter that I think he will take advantage of playing in Colorado and accumulating a lot of extra base hits. I expect him to be, a mid 800 OPS sort of player with a decently high average and 25 home runs next year. In my mind, with health, he's a high floor, low ceiling player, but one that, is kind of similar, honestly, to like a Suzuki or a Brian Reynolds, right? But then you put him in Colorado, and there's that. I think that gives him a little bit more upside potential. I have him below those 2 just because of the injury last year and because he is 31 years old and versus 27 years old for Suzuki and Reynolds. Where do you have Bryant?
29.
And anything to add on his profile?
Yeah, it's just in what you said about his plate appearances and his injury history. But yeah, and also like the call out to like the Suzuki Reynolds, because his chase rate and his woof rates and his contact rates and his OPS and all those kind of things make him a real life hitter. And yeah, he's kind of forgotten about because of what he did or what he didn't do last year because he wasn't available. So yeah, I thought he deserves to be ranked here, and I kind of enjoy him more now that he's not so talked about.
I've always loved him. Maybe
I
that's
know
the Chicago bias for me. I've always loved Chris Bryant. I'm sad that he never was the absolute superstar that everyone expected after his first season, but I'll always have a soft spot for Chris Bryant myself. Next on my list is Bryce Harper at 8, or 0.5 Bryce Harper, as I say, because he's only going to play half the season. He's a badass. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about with him. He's out for the first half with Tommy John surgery. He's probably going to come back as a DH. Full season for him, I think you could realistically expect 30 home runs, 100 runs or close to 100 runs, 100 RBIs or close to it, 10 steals, and a 300, 400, 500 triple slash. One thing I wanted to add with him, so he's always hit the fastball best. He can hit breaking stuff as well. But similarly to Mookie Betts, his first pitch swing for a player that walks a ton, his first pitch swing went way up last year. So last year, he swung at the first pitch 50.5% of the time, which is highest of his career. League average is 29.5% of the time. And he swung 56.2% versus league average of 47.1, which is also the highest of his career. What I see is two players in Harper and Betts that are seeking fastballs, 100% seeking fastballs to hit early in the count, but also don't know if they're going to get pitches to hit later on in the at-bat. And so they're trying to attack in a different sort of way than they have previously in their career. I think he's an incredibly safe mid-first round pick, right? Or a high to mid-first round pick if he's healthy. I also expect his skills to age pretty well over the next 4 or 5 years. I love Bryce Harper. He's one of my favorite players in baseball. I know you talked about him last episode. Do you have anything to add with
No.
Cool. Number 9 for me is a 27-year-old Cody Bellinger, Chicago Cubs. Signed him in the offseason. Last year, 210, 265, 654 OPS, 19 homers, 70 runs, 68 RBIs, and 14 steals. Does not sound like an outfield 2 to me. So why do I rank him here? It's a hunch. I think he crumbled a bit under the pressure in LA. There's going to be pressure in Chicago as well, but he signed a 1-year contract. I don't think there are enormous expectations. He is the poster child. He and Ke'Bryan Hayes are the poster, and probably Kristen Yelich are the poster child for if we could just optimize their launch angle, they would be superstars. We saw that from him in his MVP year. His launch angle last year was 20.3 degrees. At his peak, it was 17.9. But he's hitting. So the one stat that I'll give for Bellinger that I found fascinating was that the sinker was the only pitch that he had a positive run value against, which was a +5. His so Savant has a category called under, which is where you hit under the ball. And his under percent was 35.8%, and league average was 24.6. So he's hitting under the ball more than 10%, or 10% more often than league average. But in 19, which was his career year, it was 27.5%. So what I see is he's got this uppercut swing, right, with this over 20-degree launch, and he's getting under the ball every single time, meaning he's popping everything up. Which is why, if you think about it, if he's getting under everything, but he has a positive run value against the sinker is coming in and it's dipping. And because his swing is right here, he's running into the sinker, right? Can he make the adjustment? Are the Cubs able to get through to him or help him in a way that the Dodgers couldn't? I don't know. I think if he relaxes a little bit, in Chicago, I think there is the potential for him to be better. I'm not saying he's going to be Cody Bellinger of 2019, but I do think the talent and skill set is there for Cody Bellinger to be an outfield too. He obviously has that range of potential to be elite, to be an MVP. He's done it. The other thing with him that's been mentioned quite a bit is that he is an elite center fielder defensively, and that is going to keep him on the field. So you're going to get runs from him and potentially RBIs. And I don't know. He could be an absolute steal. I'm kind of hedging putting him here at 9. Or he could be barely an outfield 3 like he was last year. Anything to add with Cody Bellinger for you?
No, I think you outlined it well. I mean, he's a lottery ticket. So he was way down my list, but I think you outlined why he should be pushed up over so a lot of the guys in between him.
Mm-hmm. He and Yelich are in very similar categories for me. I value Bellinger over Yelich because he's going to be in his age 27 season, and because there's a change of scenery, right? Change of team. And so that to me could facilitate a shift more so than staying with the same team. All right, that's number 9 for me. Where are we at on your list?
Yeah, so we talked about Quan and Yelich. So we talked about Garcia, we talked about Brian, we talked about Harbor. So a couple players I have left on my list. Number 27, I had Alex Verdugo, projected to be the number 5 hitter in Boston's lineup. So having for 72 runs and 66 RBIs, I kind of would take the over on the RBIs if he continues to hit there. It's a very pretty friendly park for left-handed hitters. You know, his launch angle and his ground ball rate really, you know, as well as his contact and plate approach. He really is one of the better bat to ball and plate approach players out there. So yeah, number 5 in that lineup in a good hitter's park. I think really medium home, you know, medium to low power. And I think his speed at this point is pretty much, he was in the 36th percentile in sprint speed. So not really looking for speed there, but I think batting average and I think a sneaky RBI play, kind of like what Jimenez did for you last year in Cleveland, bat down in that 5th, 6th spot. You know, you get just a sneaky source of RBIs for a guy that's not a power player, but is really a high average gap, you know, in that park. I kind of like him down there again for average and RBIs.
I wish the power would come with him.
I don't know if it is.
I think there's a lot of wish casting with him, but I don't have him in my top 16 in outfield 2, mostly because I don't see besides a high average, I don't really see any sort of, you know, discernible elite skill. But he does add value, right? I don't know that I'd be comfortable with him as a starting outfielder in a 3 outfielder league. I think he's more of a 4 or a 5 on a good team, but there is potential for him to provide value. And, you know, it's not a very big tweak for him to get to 15 to 20 home runs. You know, 20 home runs and a 300 average isn't bad, right? Especially if he can get to 90 or 100 RBIs, which I think is realistic if he's hitting 5th. Who's next?
Yeah, so Varsho I have at 31. We covered him in catcher. And I think obviously you would play him at catcher, but he's also eligible in the outfield. So and I felt like based on what I project him to do, mid-20s homers, mid-teen steals, he was better than what was down here. So I have him outfield 31.
So I have him at 10th for outfield 2, which is outfield 27. I did a deeper dive on him, and I have no idea why the Blue Jays gave up what they did. Here's why. Yes, 27 home runs. I get it. I get the 16 steals. He is a strong side platoon bat, and that is it. So against left-handed pitchers last year, hit a 52 WRC plus, triple slash of 221, 250, 553. The 553 is his OPS, right? 2.3% walk rate, 27.9% K rate. Cannot hit lefties, right? Cannot hit lefties.
Right.
And so everything else, I get how great he is against right-handers. I get that the counting stats are there. There is no upside in my mind. You're not hitting 30 home runs against right-handed pitching. He almost did last year, but he is strictly a platoon. So over his career, he was a 234, 276, 615 triple slash with the 66 WRC plus against lefties. So last year wasn't an anomaly. Last year is who he is, right? So the fact that they gave up Gabriel Moreno for him, to me, is nuts, but it also means that he is going to play every day in all likelihood because they gave up a pretty penny. But I'm proceeding with caution. There is no way, you know, I've seen Varsho Helium all the way up to like the number 2 catcher. I've seen him as an outfield 1 on some lists. Like, he's a platoon guy. Just dig a little bit into his profile and you realize that he can't hit left-handers. He also hit all 27 of his home runs to the right of center field. So anybody who is that drastically 54.5% pull according to Fangraphs is scary. That type of extreme profile is scary to me. I'll let somebody else take him where he's going right now. Who do you have next?
Yeah, so my number 16, this is going to be interesting because you're gonna get into me on this one. So I didn't really know who to put.
Sure.
So I put a player who I think is interesting for this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's Harrison Bader.
Mm-hmm.
He has something you just mentioned with Bellinger, his elite defense.
Mm-hmm.
He also is exceptionally fast. So with the bat, however, one thing I like is he's projected to hit 6th.
Mm-hmm.
So potential, RBI source. As we talked about, when you hit in the bottom third of the lineup, usually there's more green lights in terms of you're just going down there trying to make stuff happen, right? And I like that aspect. The Yankees last year were 8th in stolen bases. So I like that he's on a team that is willing to use his speed. He's been kind of mercurial with the bat. He cut his K rate way down the last couple of years. And then last year the power went away, but he had plantar fasciitis was the injury he was dealing with, which is really pretty chronic injury.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, the power comes from your lower half. So I'm kind of writing off his ISO dropped to 106 last year. Before that, he went from, it was in the 160 to 217 to 193 in 2021. So I would regress him back towards like a 175, 180 ISO. And with that speed, if he's able to play every day, batting 6th in that lineup, he's just kind of an interesting play to me. I didn't see a lot of guys down here that had that mix of playing time, speed, has demonstrated better power than he showed last year, where he was very injured. But I think the batting average is troublesome, as are the contact issues. But age 28 year, I'm just interested to see, could he maybe put it all together? I think if he could, a 15 home run, 25 steal, 75 RBI season wouldn't necessarily be out of the question if he plays all year.
I think I agree that I think there is that potential. He's never played more than never had more than 427 plate appearances in a season.
Right.
So we would be assuming, 500 plate appearances, but the speed and power are there. I think a healthy season from him with 500 plate appearances is probably 15 homers and 15 steals, with the potential for more steals. I don't think he's not an outfield 2 for me, but I do think that he's worth a flyer, right? He's certainly worth having on your team or on your bench to see if he does pop. I know that the Yankees are prioritizing him as a player in their outfield, especially with his defense next to Judge. I like it. Honestly, I like it. I like going out on a limb for a player like this because there is upside. And I think it was 2 years ago, people were talking him up a bit as a player that I think could pop. But no, I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. I think that there is potential. I wish he wasn't trying to hit home runs. I wish he had more of a line drive approach and got on and stole more bags, right? Because I think he would run into 10 home runs. but then you're looking at a 270, 280 hitter with 30 steals instead. The other
Yeah,
thing,
it's really the contact issues that I think they're driving his average down, because his
yep.
launch angle was 16.7 and his ground ball rate was 41.4 last year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, you know what I mean? And
He's
so,
also a speed player with a really low walk rate at this point,
yep.
which
Yeah.
is
And he's never demonstrated able to take a walk. So I don't think
Mhm.
that's going to come at this point.
All right. We just spent 4 minutes of our life on Harrison Bader as an outfield too. So I'm
You
gonna
know,
move
one
on.
thing I'm going to say is, and you're like, and you keep saying it, and I don't disagree with you. You're like, I don't see this as an outfield too, and I don't disagree with you. But it's like when I look at the names, there aren't 16 outfield twos. That's the problem. It's supply and demand.
All right, I got two of them
There
for you.
aren't enough.
So I got two of them for you. So from 10 to 16, my list is Varsho at 10, Lars Nootbaar at 11, Anthony Santander at 12, Taylor Ward at 13, Starling Marte at 14, Yelich at 15, Tyler O'Neill at 16. So the three we haven't talked about are Nootbaar, Santander, and Marte.
We talked about Marte a little bit.
We did. I'm not a fan. He is going to have double-digit homers and double-digit steals. He slowed down quite a bit from when he was
Right.
younger. 49% ground ball rate. He is playing in a
Right.
good offense. He's 33 years old. I think he's good, not great, right? You're going to have to supplement his RBIs, and he's not going to give you 100 runs, but he plays a role. I think
Yeah.
he's decent outfield 3. The other two I do want to talk about. Lars Nootbaar.
Nude.
Not to give anything away, and I don't know how many of our league mates listen to this. I'd love him as my outfield 3. 347 plate appearances last year. He's my type of dude, man. 15% walk rate, doesn't strike out that much. 91.7 mile an hour average exit velocity, which was not in the 90th percentile. 113 max EV, 12% barrel rate, 46% hard hit. Hits the ball on the ground 43.8% of the time, which I kind of like, right? He got to 14 home runs in limited time, but hits the ball on the ground enough that I think you can see the makings of a pretty decent average. Pulled at 42.4% of the time, which, if we're to believe all the smarter people out there, that means that a left-handed pull hitter hitting the ball on the ground's average is likely to go up. Only an 8.6% swinging strike rate. All these things I like, right? Zone contact was 80.4%, which is a little low, slightly lower than league average. But as we talked about, that's not, that doesn't sink you, right? Very selective hitter. You might have to, I didn't see platoon splits last year, but you might have to just, that's something to watch. I think as terms of playing time, maybe not even performance. It might just be that St. Louis sits him against good left-handed pitching, but I like him. He's a player that if I can have him as an outfield 4, that's like optimal, but I may try to slide him in as my outfield 3 in our home league. I like Lars Nootbaar a ton. He's 25 years old. I trust the St. Louis organization as much as I don't like them. I trust them. He looks like a player on the rise to me. So he's my number 11. Any Nootbaar tidbits from you? Nootbaar
Yeah,
nuggets.
he actually hit lefties better than righties.
I have that in my notes. Yeah. It's a 69 plate appearances versus 278 versus righties. But yeah, he was better against lefties, which I was shocked by.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else on him. Like I said, my notes are OBP OBP top of the order type of player, won't kill your power either. Definitely an outfield 3 on a championship team with 2 elite outfielders, on the rise, watch playing time and position in the batting order. Those are my notes for Nootbaar. But he's fun.
He's getting a lot of helium. It's so interesting to see where he's drafted.
I had him in our league for a while there last year. So that's my 11. The only other outfielder that we haven't talked about yet is number 12, Anthony Santander. Off the top of your head, do you know how many home runs he had last year?
28.
33.
Dang it.
33 home runs and 89 RBIs. I was shocked. I learned it a couple months ago, but I was shocked when I learned it. kind of a one tool guy, right? 8.5% walk rate, 90.1 mile an hour average exit velocity, 72nd percentile, 112 max EV, 21.4 degree launch angle, which obviously means he's trying to hit bombs, and a 44% pull rate, almost a 50% fly ball rate. So he obviously, all he's trying to do is yank the ball out to pull side. I think he's a switch hitter.
He is.
Here's the thing so 2 tidbits on Santander at 28 years old that gives me just the slightest sliver of hope that he's even better than he was last year. Okay. I already said he's probably like a one-trick pony sort of player, but a player who hits the ball that hard and pulls fly balls at the rate that he does had an 86% zone contact rate last year.
Right.
So I think of power hitters like Santander as tons of swing and miss, right? You got to worry about whether they're going to strike out too much. 18.9% K rate and an 86% zone contact rate. That plus that loft, plus the ability to pull the ball for power, right, in the air there could be something more than 33 home runs in his bat. 2 other things. One is his now I don't always trust these numbers, but his projected home runs on Savant last year, if he played for Cincinnati Reds, 46 home runs expected in Cincinnati and 44 home runs expected in Anaheim. So I think there's more power in Santander's bat than we're even giving him credit for last year. All that said, he's still a sub 300 OBP guy. I don't like that. One other plus for him, though, is he's projected to hit 4th in the Baltimore lineup with Cedric Mullins, Adley Rutschman, and Gunnar Henderson. I almost said Gunnar Hernandez, not quite. He's from Alabama. Cedric Mullins, Adley Rutschman, and Gunnar Henderson in front of him. So that 89 RBI number could also go up. He's a player that I might target specifically because I have speed on my team already in our keeper league. I like him. I like Santander and Nootbaar. I think they're 2 very different players, but they're probably the 2 in this entire OF2. They're the 2 players that excite me the most. Silly as that may be.
His mix of contact and barrel rates is intriguing. It's interesting. He hit left-handers a lot better than he hit right-handers. He is a switch hitter. He only hit 220 against right-handed pitching last year. But he did hit 22 home runs. As we know, the Orioles Park at Camden is more favorable for left-handed power now.
Right.
He hit 11 home runs right-handed. But he hit 293 right-handed. That's interesting. Interesting splits there.
Those power numbers to me, though, this is going to sound pretty silly, but Santander is the type of player that if you're right on this type of analysis, could win you a league. Right? If you pick him in a redraft pretty low or lower than, his ADP, you get him a round or 2 later because people don't like him or they think he was like a one-year wonder, and he hits 40 home runs, which last year was actually realistic. If you have 40 home runs from like your 3rd drafted outfielder and your other 2 outfielders play well, all of a sudden your offense is top of the league potentially, right? Because he's giving you runs, RBIs, homers, and OPS. So I think he's interesting. I like him a lot. I didn't pay that much attention to him until scouting him for this particular exercise. So that was kind of fun for me. It's like finding a diamond in the rough a little bit. Any other comments on outfield 2? I know we talked a lot about its lack of depth and how you're looking for specific stats or kind of hoping for players to be something that they haven't been.
Yeah, and not really. This is rough, and I don't think there were 16 outfield 2s.
Right? Do you have a favorite player in your outfield 2 list?
Favorite player in this list? I think it would be obvious if it's Stephen Kwan, right?
For sure.
And we both love Bryce Harper. So a non-Kwan, non-Harper favorite. stuff that airs. Always great podcast content.
Right. I like Teoscar and Eloy. I said that earlier, but mine is actually Lars Nootbaar. I hate saying it because I think his name is not, you can't call someone's name corny. That's mean, but it's silly. When I say it, I feel silly. But
When I saw the Cardinals in Pittsburgh last year, like all the Cardinals fans, every time he did anything, were yelling Newt.
it's funny.
He seems to be a fan favorite. And it's interesting because honestly, I think for fantasy, my favorite player is the player I had at 17 would be Tyler O'Neill.
Mhm.
And you talked about the crowded outfield situation, in Cardinals, which is 100% true. And I haven't read the article yet, but there was an article on Athletic about Ollie Marmol talking about all the competition they're having in camp and how excited he is, and to see how it all shakes out. So, yeah, I mean, I think O'Neill and Nootbaar are two players that, their stock may change here pretty quickly as all that shakes out. But a very competitive team. As you said, they're really good at what they do, sometimes annoyingly so.
Right.
So
I wonder if and O'Neill would be the one, I think. I wonder if O'Neill gets traded, honestly.
yeah,
Specifically
for
for pitching, right? Because
Mhm.
if you have like Burleson is left-handed, Nootbaar's left-handed, but if you have Yepes and you have O'Neill and you have Jordan Walker coming up, those are three right-handed corner players.
Mhm.
And you're going to keep the ones that are cheaper, and you're going to keep the ones that you see more potential in, right? I know that O'Neill still does have value. His name was floated quite a bit in trade rumors the last couple of years. So I think he would be the one to go. Part of why I like Nootbaar too is he's one of the few left-handed outfielders that they have, and I think there's a value as well. But yeah, this was a fun exercise. As much as there are players that I don't particularly love, and I'm certainly scared of a number of these names on my fantasy team, it was still fun, and there's always a lot to learn, right? I appreciate your coupling of Suzuki and Reynolds in the previous pod, because it drove me to look at those two players together, and gave me a different, I think, appreciation for both of them. So always fun, always a learning experience. May I remind you that it is February 17th, and we are going to be on a plane to spring training on March 9th.
Thanks for the reminder,
bro. I'm sure you don't need the reminder. I think about it every, 3 minutes or so, but it's going to be so freaking amazing.
Yeah, like I said, February pre-pod, just February, just crawling at that date looming, along with several other things that just can't seem to come fast enough. So
you got to put the carrot in front of you, and in my mind, anything could happen between now and then, and I'm going to be okay because I've got that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'll also say my experiences at spring training, I went pretty much every year for a while, every year have exceeded my expectations. And that's coming from a huge baseball fan. So we got a lot to look forward to.
Awesome. That's
going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
Sorry about that 4 minutes you spent on Bader that you won't get back ever.
Which one? Oh,
yeah. Hey, that's 4 more minutes closer to spring training, right?
You owe me 4 minutes, bro.
I owe you 4 minutes.
We'll be back next week with Outfield 3.
All right.
All right. Good to see you, man.